This begins the presentations on the nervous system. The nervous system has a really important functions. It detects changes and feels sensations, so what's going on outside of the body and inside of the body. It monitors that all the time. And then it will initiate the appropriate response, whether it's something here again responding to something in our environment or internally. When you eat some food, your digestive tract needs to be monitored by the nervous system and provide the digestive enzymes as that progresses. And here again, so detecting the changes and then appropriate responses. It is also used to organize information for immediate use and to store it for future use. And certainly that's what we're all about here. You're learning about anatomy and physiology because you want to pass these tests, to pass the program, to get your certification, and to go out and work in the healthcare area. And obviously if you've got patients and you're going to help them, you need to know something. And then here again, this kind of relates back to that internal detection. It regulates body function to maintain homeostasis, right? So when you're running, your muscles need more oxygen for energy, so you're going to breathe faster. Your heart rate increases to provide it to those muscle fiber cells as needed. So very important system of the body. It's divided into the central nervous system, which would be the brain and spinal cord. That's your processing areas. And then the peripheral nervous system, which include the cranial and spinal nerves. And then here again, those are the nerves spill into those, and so they can relay information on what's going on here to the central nervous system. And obviously the nerves respond, create the impulse response, so you can, wave to your friend as you see them going by. And then we have the autonomic nervous system. Here again, those things that just happen in our body as a natural response to environment, or here again, internally. The main nerve cell we looked at was called the neuron. And we saw, and we'll look at some pictures later, but there is a cell body. This contains the nucleus, for the direction for the cells, and the organelles to sustain the cell. They are in the central nervous system, and in the peripheral nervous system they are close to the central nervous system. And obviously these are protected often by bone. The dendrite is the extensions of the cell body where the impulses come in towards it. And then as it goes away to go onto an effector, like a gland or a muscle or another nerve, that is the axon, where it is carried away from the cell body. And the membrane of this cell carries the electric nerve impulse. Here again, it's an electrical process. The Schwann cells of the peripheral nervous system make the myelin sheath. And these are layers of a Schwann cell membrane. They're predominantly phospholipids, and they insulate one nerve impulse from another, so that way we can do things more effectively. And then because of these nodes of Ranvier, it can also do it more efficiently. So myelinated dendrites and axons are really good for better performance, whether it's a physical or mental performance. So these nodes of Ranvier are the little spaces between the Schwann cells. So there's a little break in the myelin. And the reason it makes the nerve work better is it doesn't have to depolarize the entire length of the dendrite or axon. It can just skip between these little nodes. And the myelin sheath and the Schwann cells themselves become what we call the neurolemma. And that's really good because this gives a pathway. So if a peripheral nerve axon is damaged, it often can regenerate and follow that pathway. Now in the CNS, we're looking at the cells that make myelin. They are called oligodendrites. And here again, we want those for good processing. But there is no neurolemma. These cells don't make that coating or casing, if you want to call it. So when neurons in the central nervous system are damaged, they're done. Obviously, people with strokes, that's why they may have loss of function. Sometimes neighboring cells can take over and they'll regain some. Sometimes they can obviously regain fully, and other times there's just too much damage, so some function is lost. We also have the microglia, and these are moving cells in the central nervous system, and they get rid of debris and pathogens because we don't want old stuff hanging around. It gets in the way, and we don't want germs. The astrocytes, in the embryo, they form the framework for the neurons that become the brain. But everybody has astrocytes, and we want them. They wrap around the capillaries of the brain, and this is really important because it's a highly protective feature. So harmful substances in the blood cannot get through into the brain. We call this the blood-brain barrier. And here again, between the astrocytes and the less permeableness of the capillaries, it makes it harder for certain meds to get across. I mean, that could be problematic, but sometimes we don't want meds to get there, and certainly it is good for germs not to get out of the blood and into the brain, but it does also make it harder for antibodies. So a lot of times when things get going in the brain, it's harder to stop it because there's certain things that we can't get there. Then the ependyma are cells that help circulate the cerebral spinal fluid. They line the ventricles of the brain, and they have cilia. And we'll talk about cerebrospinal fluid a little bit later, but here again, this is the liquid that surrounds the brain and the spinal cord. It brings nutrients, and it also helps to clean up a bit. Just as we saw the synapse between the motor neuron and the muscle, some nerves need to pass their message on to another nerve. And we've got the space between them, the synapses here. So a dendrite, well, it would be the axon of one sending the message to the dendrite of the next one. And here again, synapse is one of their purposes, or their design is so that the transmission only goes in one way. And we have neurotransmitters here. Remember, they were the chemicals that were emitted by the axon terminals when the depolarization, the message, the impulse goes along. And we know that these neurotransmitters diffuse across the synapse, but there must be a receptor on the postsynaptic neuron in order to accept the message and keep it going. And of course, we studied that acetylcholine was the neurotransmitter from the motor neuron to the muscle. We also have other ones. I don't expect you to remember all of these, but I would know what they do, but I would expect you to recognize the term. Dopamine, GABA, norepinephrine, glutamate, and serotonin. Dopamine, certainly, we feel that that's somewhat problematic in patients with Parkinson's disease. And perhaps serotonin, you've heard that term used in some ads for medications, for mood enhancers. For people with depression, they feel that they don't have enough of this serotonin passing along. And of course, just as we had cholinesterase to get rid of acetylcholine, there are inactivators for these other neurotransmitters, although some of them are actually not destroyed in that fashion. They are taken back, so we call that reuptake, that the axon terminal takes them back after they've activated by touching the receptors on the next nerve. And like I said, this design often works well for medications that alter mood, behavior, or fix lower blood pressure. And here we can see a picture of the neurotransmitter from the axon on the left. You can see the little vesicles. It's coming out. It's coming across the synapse. And then there are receptors on the postsynaptic neuron, the second one. And so it's passing that message along. I don't know that you need to remember so much about this. I will mention it, but I will not be asking questions on the test. We have excitatory synapses where the neurotransmitter causes the postsynaptic, the second neuron, to depolarize. So it's transmitting the impulse from one nerve to another, and certainly to a muscle cell or to a gland. And then we have inhibitory synapses, which cause the neuron, the second one, to hyperpolarize. And this won't transmit the impulse. And here again, sometimes we need slowing mechanisms. Slow down the heart rate. We need better muscle coordination. This is what we might need in order to get that effective coordination. There are types of neurons. They're sensory neurons. Here again, they get impulses from the receptors. Remember, we talked about the receptors in the dermis when we studied the integumentary system. And these will pick up the message and bring it towards the central nervous system. So they are sensory or called afferent, meaning coming towards. The somatic ones are in the skin, the skeletal cells in the joints, and the visceral ones are those that pick up senses in the internal organs. And then we have to have a nerve that will make a response. So the central nervous system processes it, decides on the response, and this response is sent out. Those are the motor or efferent. Efferent is proper pronunciation, but I emphasize the E because think of exit the central nervous system. And here again, the somatic ones deal with the skeletal muscles, where the visceral ones deal with smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. And of course, visceral motor neurons are part of the autonomic nervous system. So we've got both motor and sensory neurons in the PNS. And we have some interneurons. And we find those in the central nervous system. These are the ones that process. Although here again, they may be sensory, motor, or integrational. And we can see pictures. On the left, we see a unipolar, which is another classification of neurons. And you can see in some of the supplemental things I have in this learning folder for this topic, you'll see pictures of these. But nonetheless, you see one pole comes out of the cell body, but one side, the dendrite, is a long skinny thing, but the ends of it bring the information in and then send it out to the axon. And then if we don't have it here, but your picture in the book has it, there would be interneurons above that getting the message, and then once it is processed, it will send the message to the motor neuron or the efferent neuron. See all the dendrites surrounding that cell. This is a multipolar neuron, and the message comes down and then it goes out the axon, and it's kind of showing there that the axon terminals would either affect a gland, a muscle, or another nerve. So look at these. Here again, we talked about some of these, the myelin sheath, where it is. We see the Schwann cells. We see the nodes of Ranvier. We see the neurolemma. So when we use the word nerves, it's a group of axons and or dendrites of many neurons, and it has blood vessels and connective tissue to hold it together. There are sensory nerves that here again pick up information. There are motor nerves that cause a reaction. And there are mixed ones that do both. And a nerve tract is a group of neurons within the central nervous system. And here again, they can be either sensory or motor, and we call this the white matter, so because it looks a white hue if one was doing a dissection. So we'll continue on in the next presentations to look at how the nerves work.